This presentation contains detailed descriptions of a real-life incident involving death and severe injuries. Viewer discretion is advised. Their tent was sliced open from the inside. In the dead of a Siberian winter, with temperatures plummeting to 40 degrees below zero, 9 experienced hikers cut their way out of their only shelter and fled into the darkness. They ran without shoes, without coats, some wearing nothing but their socks and underwear. They abandoned all of their gear. Their food, their warm clothes, their axes, their maps, everything they needed to survive. They fled as if from an unimaginable terror, a threat so immediate and so horrifying that a frozen death in the wilderness was the better option. When their bodies were finally found weeks later, scattered across a desolate mountainside, the mystery only deepened. Some had died of hypothermia, frozen solid in the snow, but others had suffered injuries that baffled seasoned investigators. One man had a fractured skull, but with no external trauma, as if his head had been crushed from the inside out. A woman and another man had their chests caved in, with the force of a high-speed car crash, yet their skin was unbroken. And one of them was found in a stream bed, her eyes missing, her soft tissues decayed, and her tongue forcibly removed. There were no signs of a struggle with another person, no animal tracks other than their own, just 9 sets of footprints, leading away from the safety of the tent and down the snowy slope into oblivion. For over 60 years, the question has haunted investigators, researchers, and anyone who hears the story. What could possibly drive 9 of the Soviet Union's toughest hikers to willingly run to their deaths on a remote mountain named by the local tribes the Mountain of the Dead? To understand the horror of what happened on that mountain, you first have to understand who these people were. This wasn't a group of naive teenagers on a weekend camping trip. This was a team of elite athletes and engineering students from the Ural Polytechnical Institute. They were tough, intelligent, and deeply experienced in the unforgiving conditions of the Russian winter. They knew the wilderness, they respected it, and they knew how to survive it. Their leader was a 23-year-old radio engineering student named Igor Dyatlov. He was the architect of this expedition, a Grade 3 trek, the highest and most difficult classification for a hiking route in the Soviet Union. To achieve the certification of Master of Sport, the highest honor for an athlete, Dyatlov and his team had to conquer this route. He was meticulous, a brilliant planner, and a respected leader who had led his friends on countless other expeditions. He wasn't reckless. He was the opposite. His team was a hand-picked group of his peers, the best of the best from the university's sports club. There was Zinaida Kolmogorova, just 22, a fiery and beloved member of the group, known for her resilience and warmth. There was Yuri Doroshenko, the jokester, always smiling in the group photos. Ludmila Dubinina, only 20, was known for her incredible toughness in singing songs by the campfire. There was Alexander Kolevatov, the quiet, dependable physics student. Rustam Slobodin, the strong, athletic engineer. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, a descendant of French engineers who had settled in the Urals, was known for his good humor. Semyon Zolotaryov was the oldest of the group, a 38-year-old combat veteran of World War II, a man who had seen true horror and survived. And finally, Yuri Yudin, the 10th member. Their journey began on January 23, 1959. You can see it in the photographs they took, the black and white images that survived the ordeal. They are smiling, laughing, full of the optimism and invincibility of youth. They look like college kids anywhere in the world, excited for an adventure. They took trains and trucks to the furthest reaches of civilization, to a small village called Vizhai, the last settlement before the vast, empty wilderness of the northern Ural Mountains. The mood, captured in their shared diary, was electric. They sang songs, debated politics and love, and marveled at the stark, frozen beauty of the landscape. One entry reads, "The weather is amazing. The sun is a dazzling spectacle. We are walking along a river path. The forest is gradually thinning out. I wonder what awaits us on this trip. What will we encounter?" It's a chilling premonition, a question that would be answered in the most horrific way imaginable. In Vizhai, they spent the night, enjoying one last warm meal before heading into the wild. The next day, they began the trek. For days, they skied through dense forests and over frozen rivers, covering mile after punishing mile. The conditions were brutal, but their spirits were high. Their diary entries and photographs show a team working in perfect harmony, confident in their skills and in each other. Then, on January 28th, Something happened that would save one of their lives and haunt him for the rest of it. Yuri Yudin, the 10th member, was suddenly struck by severe pain in his leg and back, a chronic nerve condition flaring up from the cold and the exertion. He knew he couldn't continue. The group held a meeting. They were a team and the decision was unanimous. Yuri had to turn back. It was a heartbreaking moment. He said his goodbyes to his friends, wishing them luck and promising to see them when they returned. In one of the last photographs ever taken of the group together, Yuri Yudin stands with Lyudmila Dubinina, who is wrapping a warm scarf around his face. He looks sad, but his friends are smiling, reassuring him. He would later say it was the last time he saw them alive. As he turned back toward the village, he watched his 9 friends disappear into the white expanse, a tight-knit group of adventurers heading towards their goal, and unknowingly towards their doom. He was the sole survivor simply because his body had failed him, and he would be left with the lifelong burden of a single agonizing question. What happened to them after he left? The remaining 9 pushed on. Their goal was a mountain named Otorten, which in the language of the local Mansi people, means don't go there. They were now completely alone, hundreds of miles from any help. Their diaries document the deteriorating weather. The wind picked up, the snow became deeper, and the visibility dropped. On February 1st, they began their ascent up the slopes of a neighboring peak, Kholat Syakhl. In the Mansi language, this mountain has an even more ominous name: the Mountain of the Dead. Lost in a blizzard and disoriented, they deviated from their planned route. Instead of finding a pass to set up camp in a forested area, protected from the elements, they found themselves on the exposed, barren slope of the mountain. It was a critical error, but not necessarily a fatal one for a group this experienced. As darkness fell and the storm raged, Igor Dyatlov made a decision. They would make camp right there on the open slope. It was a strange choice, one that investigators would question for decades. Why stop there? Why not retreat just a mile back down to the safety of the tree line? We don't know why, but we know what they did. They pitched their large military-grade tent, dug it into the snow to anchor it against the wind, and prepared for the night. They ate a small meal of bacon and crackers. From the evidence left behind, it seems like a normal, routine evening. They took off their boots, shed their heavy outer layers, and settled into their sleeping bags, ready to wait out the storm. They were 9 friends, huddled together for warmth against the Siberian winter, on a desolate mountain slope. And then, sometime in the middle of the night, something terrified them so completely that they used a knife to slash their way out of their tent and fled, half-dressed, into a lethal 60-mile-per-hour blizzard. They never came back. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't a scream in the night or a distress call. It was silence. A profound, unnerving silence that stretched from the desolate Ural Mountains all the way back to the city. Igor Dyatlov had promised his sports club that he would send a telegram the moment the group finished their route and arrived back in the town of Vizhai. That telegram was expected on February 12th. But February 12th came and went. Then the 13th, the 14th. No telegram. First, no one was overly concerned. Delays were common on these brutal expeditions. A snowstorm, a minor injury, a miscalculation. Any number of things could throw a team off schedule by a few days. The families waited. The sports club waited. But as the days bled into a week, a quiet unease began to curdle into genuine fear. These weren't amateurs. This was a highly experienced, disciplined team led by a meticulous planner. A delay this long with no word at all was out of character. It was wrong. By February 20th, the families could wait no longer. They demanded action. The head of the institute organized volunteer search parties, composed of students and teachers, many of whom were friends with the missing hikers. Soon, the army and the local militia, the police were brought in, deploying planes and helicopters to scour the vast, unforgiving wilderness from the air. For days they found nothing. The sheer scale of the Otorten mountain range was overwhelming. It was a sea of white, a landscape of punishing wind and snow that could swallow a person whole and leave no trace. The aerial searches turned up no color, no movement, no sign of life. It was as if the 9 hikers had simply vanished from the face of the earth. Then, on February 26th, 6 days into the official search, a pilot spotted something. A dark shape, something out of place on the eastern slope of a mountain known to the indigenous Mansi people as Kholat Syakhl. The name translates to Dead Mountain. A ground team, led by a student volunteer named Mikhail Sherevin, was directed to the coordinates. As they fought their way up the slope, battling the ever-present wind, they saw it. A single collapsed tent, nearly buried in snow, its canvas flapping violently in the gale. It was the Dyatlov group's tent, but the scene was immediately terrifyingly wrong. The camp was deserted. There were no voices, no fire, no signs of life. Just the lonely rhythmic snap of the canvas in the wind. It was an Arctic ghost town, a place that had been abandoned in a hurry. The team's skis were stabbed into the snow outside, a makeshift anchor. An ice axe stood guard nearby. But where were the people? Cautiously, the search party approached. The first mystery was the state of the tent itself. It hadn't been properly dismantled. It had been destroyed, and not by the weather. One side of the tent, the side facing away from the relative safety of the forest down below, was sliced and ripped open. When investigators later examined the cuts, they made a chilling discovery. The slashes were made not from the outside, as an attacker would, but from the inside. Someone inside that tent, in the pitch black of a polar night, had been so desperate to get out that they took a knife to their only shelter. They didn't even take the few seconds required to untie the entrance flap. They slashed their way out into the blizzard. Why? The scene inside the tent only deepened the mystery. It was a snapshot of a normal evening that had been violently interrupted. 9 pairs of boots were lined up neatly. Warm coats, hats, and gloves were left behind. A shared meal was laid out unfinished. Flasks of vodka, a common staple for warmth and morale, were full, ruling out the idea that they were drunk and irrational. Their money, their passports, their personal diaries, and perhaps most importantly, their cameras were all there untouched. Robbery was not a motive. Whatever happened here, it wasn't human malice in the conventional sense. Whatever happened here, it caused 9 experienced, level-headed hikers to abandon all their survival gear. Their boots, their coats, their food, their shelter, and flee into a sub-zero hurricane. It was an act of collective suicidal madness, or an act of pure, unadulterated terror. Then the search party saw the footprints. Leading away from the ruined tent, heading down the steep, open slope towards the distant treeline a mile away, was a trail of tracks preserved in the snow. And this is where the story shifts from strange to utterly bizarre. The footprints told a story that made no sense. There were 8 or 9 distinct sets of prints, but they weren't made by heavy, insulated hiking boots. They were the prints of people wearing only socks, or a single felt liner boot. Some were completely barefoot. You could see the shape of individual toes frozen into the snow. They had run out half naked, into temperatures of -30 degrees Fahrenheit. But the tracks weren't what you'd expect from a group fleeing in panic. They weren't scattered in every direction. At first, the prints descended the slope in a surprisingly orderly, side-by-side fashion. It was as if the group had exited the tent and walked calmly, deliberately downhill, away from whatever they were escaping. They walked together as a group for about 500 meters. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of anyone else being there, no animal tracks. Just the 9 sets of footprints, marching away from their only hope of survival. As the tracks continued down the slope, they became more scattered, suggesting the group eventually broke apart. But they all led in the same general direction, down, away from the exposed slope of Dead Mountain, and towards the relative cover of the forest's edge. And then, at the border of the woods, the blowing snow had done its work. The trail vanished. The footprints simply stopped, erased by the wind, leaving the search party staring into the dark, silent trees. They had found the camp. They had found the trail. But the 9 hikers were still missing, swallowed by the forest. The search had only just begun, and it was about to get much, much darker. The footprints led them away from the destroyed tent, down the treacherous, snow-covered slope of Kholat Syakhl. Each step the searchers took was a step into a deeper mystery. The tracks were a chaotic jumble, some made by bare feet, others by socks, a few by a single boot. They descended for nearly a mile, a straight, desperate line pointing away from the only shelter on the entire mountain. The trail led them toward the edge of the forest that loomed at the bottom of the pass, a dark, impenetrable wall of pine and birch. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of their own boots in the snow and the whisper of the wind through the skeletal branches. The searchers, hardened outdoorsmen themselves, couldn't fathom it. Why would 9 experienced hikers abandon their tent, their gear, their very means of survival, and flee into the teeth of an Arctic night. What could possibly be so terrifying that cutting your way out of your own tent was the better option? The trail of footprints eventually became confused, lost in the deeper snow as it entered the treeline. But it had led them to a landmark. A single colossal Siberian cedar tree stood like a gnarled sentinel at the edge of the woods, its ancient branches reaching out over the snow. And it was there, under the sprawling limbs of this giant tree, that the search party made its first horrific discovery. Lying side by side in the snow were the bodies of two of the missing hikers. They were identified as Yuri Krivonischenko and Yuri Doroshenko. The sight was baffling, a scene of profound and disturbing contradictions. Both men were stripped down to their underwear. In temperatures of -25 degrees Fahrenheit, they were almost naked. Next to them were the scattered, charred remains of a small fire. It was a pathetic attempt at warmth, built with twigs and small branches that must have burned out quickly, offering little protection against the crushing cold. The fire was so small, in fact, that it seemed to have been made by people who were too weak, too disoriented, or too rushed to build a proper one. But the most bizarre detail was the tree itself. The branches of the cedar, up to 15 feet high, were snapped and broken, as if someone had frantically tried to climb it. The searchers looked up, their eyes tracing the path of broken limbs against the gray sky. Why would they climb the tree? Were they trying to break off more wood for the fire? If so, why not use the abundant deadfall on the forest floor? Was it a desperate attempt to get a better vantage point to look back towards the tent? Or were they trying to escape something? Something on the ground? The hands of both men told a grim story. Their knuckles were scraped raw, their fingers torn and bloodied, the skin shredded down to the bone in some places. These were the hands of men who had been clawing, punching, and tearing at the rough bark of the cedar tree in a desperate final frenzy. The medical examiner would later confirm they both died of hypothermia. They had simply frozen to death. But that diagnosis explained nothing. It didn't explain their lack of clothing. It didn't explain the pathetic fire. It didn't explain why they had savagely attacked the very tree that stood over their frozen bodies. It was the first piece of a puzzle where nothing fit. With a growing sense of dread, the search party fanned out. 2 were found. 7 were still missing. They began a methodical search of the area between the giant cedar and the abandoned tent, a grim stretch of about 500 yards up the open slope. The logic was simple. If the hikers were separated, some might have tried to make it back to the shelter they had so mysteriously fled. It was on this upward path, pointing back toward the tent, that they found the next body. It was Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader. He was found lying on his back in the snow, one hand clutching a small birch branch, the other arm raised as if to shield his face from the sky. He was better dressed than the 2 by the cedar, wearing pants and a sweater, but he had no shoes or hat. His posture was one of stillness, of a man who had simply laid down and given up, his final reserves of energy completely spent. He too had died of hypothermia. Just a few hundred yards away from him, closer to the tent, they found Zina Kolmogorova. She was found face down, a frozen statue of forward momentum. Her body was a picture of a desperate final struggle. The snow beneath her was disturbed, her hands were clenched into fists, and her legs were bent as if she had been crawling, clawing her way up the slope, inch by agonizing inch, back towards the tent. Her face was covered in blood, though it wasn't from an attack. The medical examiner would determine it was likely from the bursting of capillaries due to extreme cold and exhaustion, a final violent internal failure. She had fought harder than anyone, it seemed, pushing her body past its absolute limits until her heart simply stopped. Then they found the 5th. Not far from Zina, they located the body of Rustam Slobodin. He was also lying face down in the snow, positioned on the same line between the cedar and the tent, as if he too had been part of this doomed attempt to return. Like the others, he was inadequately dressed. And like the others, the official cause of death was listed as hypothermia. But there was something else. Something the initial searchers might have missed, but the medical examiner would not. Rustam Slobodin had a small but significant fracture in his skull, a crack nearly 7 inches long. It wasn't considered a fatal wound on its own. He had still frozen to death. But it was the first piece of hard evidence that something more than just the cold was at play here. How does a man get a fractured skull in the middle of a snowy, empty mountainside? Did he fall and hit his head on a rock hidden beneath the snow? It was possible. But in a case with zero easy answers, it was a deeply unsettling discovery. So now there were five bodies, all found within a mile of the tent, all dead from hypothermia, but under circumstances that defied all logic and reason. 2 men, stripped to their underwear, with mutilated hands at the base of a tree. 3 others, including the leader, frozen in the act of a desperate, failed return to camp, one of them with a fractured skull. The group had been split. 2 seemed to have stayed by the forest's edge while 3 made a run for it. Why? What caused this division? And more urgently, where were the other 4? Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Bricknells, and Semyon Zolotaryov were still missing. The searchers scanned the vast, empty landscape. They had found the tent. They had found the first 5 hikers. But the mystery, instead of shrinking, had grown impossibly large. The story told by the dead was one of terror, chaos, and a desperate struggle against an unseen enemy. And the searchers knew, as they stood there on that frozen slope, that the worst was almost certainly yet to come. The 4 missing hikers were somewhere out there, buried beneath the snow, and they held the darkest secrets of all. The search for the final 4 dragged on. February bled into March and March into April. The Siberian winter refused to release its grip on the mountain. The search parties, a rotating cast of students, soldiers, and local Mansi hunters, were fighting a losing battle against the elements. They probed the snow with long metal rods, hoping for the grim thud of a frozen body. But the snow was over 12 feet deep in places, a vast white tomb that guarded its secrets jealously. Days turned into weeks of fruitless, back-breaking work. Morale plummeted. The families of the missing 4 waited in an agony of suspense, suspended between the faintest glimmer of hope and the crushing certainty of loss. To the investigators, it was a race against time, not to save lives, but to salvage the truth before the spring thaw washed it all away. And then in early May, the mountain finally began to exhale. The sun grew stronger, the days longer. The snowpack, which had seemed like a permanent feature of the landscape, began to weep. Water trickled, then flowed, carving new paths down the slope. The forest floor, hidden for months, began to re-emerge. And with the thaw came the breakthrough. It was a Mansi hunter who found the first sign. About 80 yards from the cedar tree where Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko were found, he spotted a collection of cut branches and scraps of clothing partially buried in the melting snow. Following the trail, the searchers were led to the edge of a deep ravine, where a creek was now beginning to flow with meltwater. There, under an overhang, they found something that was both heartbreaking and deeply unsettling. It was a den. Someone had carefully, methodically, laid a bed of fir branches on the snow. It was a desperate attempt to create a last refuge, a final barrier against the killing cold. On top of this makeshift bed lay a pair of trousers and a sweater. It was clear the hikers had made a final, desperate stand here. And as the searchers looked closer, into the dark, rushing water of the creek bed at the bottom of the ravine, they saw them. They were found buried under more than 10 feet of snow, locked in the ice of the streambed. First, they found Lyudmila Dubinina. She was on her knees, her face and chest pressed against the rock face of the waterfall. Nearby, they found Semyon Zolotaryov, the mysterious older member of the group. Then, a little further downstream, they recovered Alexander Kolevatov. And finally, Nicholas Thibault-Bricknells, locked in an embrace with Zolotaryov, as if one had been trying to shield the other in their final moments. The discovery brought a grim sense of relief. The search was over. All 9 were accounted for. But as the bodies were brought to the surface and examined, that relief curdled into sheer, unadulterated horror. The first 5 hikers had died of hypothermia. Their story was tragic, but understandable. The final 4. Their story was something else entirely. It was a story written in shattered bone and inexplicable violence. The medical examiner, Boris Vozhrozdeny, was a seasoned professional. He had seen the worst of what humanity and nature could do. But what he found during the autopsies of these last 4 hikers would haunt him for the rest of his life. On the outside, they looked much like the others. There were some abrasions, some minor scrapes from being washed down the rocky creek bed. But internally, it was a war zone. Nicholas Thibault-Bricknells had suffered a catastrophic skull fracture. The damage was so extensive, so severe, that Vozhrozdeny compared it to the kind of injury sustained by someone hit by a speeding car. It was a crushing, blunt-force trauma that would have killed him almost instantly. Alexander Kolevatov had a deep wound behind his ear and a deformed neck, suggesting a severe dislocation. But it was Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov who bore the most baffling and horrific injuries. Both of them had multiple symmetrical rib fractures. This wasn't one or two broken ribs from a fall. Dubinina had 10 ribs broken. Zolotaryov had 12. They were snapped, crushed, as if the two of them had been caught in a giant invisible vice. The force required to inflict such damage, Vozrozdeny noted in his report, was immense. It was equivalent to the shockwave from a powerful explosion or, again, a high-speed car crash. And here is the detail that elevates this case from a tragic mystery to a truly paranormal enigma. Despite these devastating, bone-shattering internal injuries, there were no corresponding external wounds. No significant bruising. No soft tissue damage. Nothing. Their skin was largely intact. It was a medical and physical impossibility. How can you crush a person's ribcage without leaving so much as a heavy bruise on their chest? How can you fracture a man's skull so completely without breaking the skin on his head? It made no sense. It was as if they had been hugged to death by a force of unimaginable power. But the horror didn't stop there. When the examiner looked at Lyudmila Dubinina, he discovered something else. Her tongue, her eyes, and part of her lips were missing. The official report would later suggest that these soft tissues had been removed by natural putrefaction in the running water of the creek. Many investigators, both then and now, find that explanation completely unsatisfying. The other bodies found in the exact same conditions had not suffered such specific surgical-like damage. It was as if something had deliberately and precisely removed them. The case was now spiraling into the realm of the truly bizarre. The investigators had 9 dead hikers, a tent sliced open from the inside, a trail of barefoot prints leading into the woods, and now, for bodies with injuries so violent and so strange they defied all logical explanation. And just when they thought it couldn't get any stranger, it did. As a matter of routine, the victims' clothing and bodies were tested for radiation. Most came back clean. But the sweater and trousers found on the Furbow Den, the ones belonging to Lyudmila Dubinina and Alexander Kolevatov, showed significant levels of radioactive contamination. Not enough to be lethal, but far, far higher than background levels. Where did it come from? There were no known radioactive sources on Kholat Syakhl. The hikers had no reason to be carrying anything radioactive. It was another impossible piece in a puzzle that was starting to look less like an accident and more like an attack. The investigators were now faced with a set of facts that seemed to belong in a science fiction novel, not a case file. A silent, invisible force, capable of shattering human bone without leaving a mark on the skin. A strange surgical removal of soft tissue. And the inexplicable presence of radiation deep in the Ural Mountains. The official cause of death for these last 4 was listed as death by a compelling unknown force. It's one of the most chilling and honest phrases ever written in a coroner's report. They had no idea. They had found the hikers, but they were no closer to finding what had killed them. All they knew was that on that night, on that lonely windswept mountain, something had descended upon the camp. Something powerful enough to make 9 experienced hikers flee in terror into a frozen wasteland, and violent enough to crush them from the inside out. The question was no longer just what happened. The question was, what kind of thing could do this? The Soviet authorities now had a file full of contradictions. A case that defied every law of nature and human behavior they knew. They had 9 dead, highly competent young people. They had a tent, sliced open from the inside. They had a trail of footprints leading away from safety, not towards it. And they had bodies with injuries so severe, they resembled the victims of a high-speed car crash or a bomb blast, yet with absolutely no external signs of a struggle. No soft tissue damage. It was as if a phantom menace, immense and powerful, had passed through them, shattering their bones while leaving their skin untouched. The man tasked with solving this impossible puzzle was a senior prosecutor named Lev Ivanov. He was a product of the Soviet system, methodical, by the book, and accustomed to cases that had logical, earthly explanations. But this was different. As he and his team dug deeper, the mystery only intensified. They interviewed the Mansi people, the indigenous hunters who had lived in these mountains for centuries. The Mansi spoke of the area with a kind of fearful reverence. They called the mountain Kholat Syakhl, which in their language translates to Dead Mountain. A place where strange things happened, a place to be avoided. But they were adamant. They had not seen the hikers. and their sacred beliefs forbade them from harming strangers in their lands. The investigators believed them. The nature of the injuries didn't point to a human attacker anyway. Ivanov's team scoured the area around the tent and the cedar tree. They used metal detectors, searching for shrapnel, fragments of a rocket, anything that could explain an explosion. They found nothing. Not a single foreign object. They considered every possibility. An argument that spiraled out of control? Unlikely. The hikers were a tight-knit group, and it wouldn't explain why they all fled or the nature of their injuries. An animal attack? A bear or a wolf would have left behind a bloodbath of claw and bite marks, not clean internal crushing force. An avalanche? This was the lead theory for a while. It could explain the sudden need to cut out of the tent. But experienced investigators and mountaineers who flew to the scene quickly dismissed it. The slope was too gentle, there was no sign of a recent snow slide, and the tent itself was still partially standing. An avalanche would have flattened and buried it completely. Plus, an avalanche doesn't selectively crush people's ribs while leaving others untouched. And it certainly doesn't cause their clothes to become radioactive. Yes, the radiation. That was the ghost in the machine of this investigation. The Geiger counters had chattered insistently over some of the clothing found on the bodies in the ravine. It wasn't a lethal dose, but it was significantly higher than background levels. Where did it come from? Ivanov had no answer. It was another piece that simply didn't fit. Every logical door he tried to open was slammed shut by a contradictory fact. The pressure from Moscow was immense. This incident was becoming a national story, whispered about in hushed tones. The Soviet Union, a superpower built on the foundations of science and rationalism, could not tolerate a mystery it couldn't solve. They needed an answer. Any answer. So, in late May 1959, just 3 months after the search began, Lev Ivanov abruptly closed the case. His official report was a masterclass in bureaucratic ambiguity. The final verdict, the official cause of death for the Dyatlov group, was a phrase that has haunted researchers for over 60 years. He concluded that the hikers had died as a result of a compelling natural force which they were unable to overcome. A compelling natural force. Think about that for a moment. It's a sentence that says everything and nothing all at once. It's not an avalanche. It's not an animal. It's not murder. It's an unknown, overwhelming power. It was the government officially shrugging its shoulders and saying, "We have no idea." The case files were classified, stamped with the seal of Soviet secrecy, and locked away. The area around Dyatlov Pass was closed to the public, forbidden territory for the next 3 years. And the families of the victims were left with a meaningless phrase to explain the horrific deaths of their children. The story was supposed to end there, buried in a file cabinet. But it didn't, because Lev Ivanov knew more than he wrote in his official report. Much more. Decades later, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a retired and guilt-ridden Ivanov began to talk. He gave interviews in the early 1990s, revealing what had really happened during the investigation. He confessed that he had been ordered by high-ranking regional officials to close the case and classify all the findings. He was told to drop a specific line of inquiry that he found deeply disturbing. During the investigation, Ivanov and his team had been flooded with reports from other people in the region, other hiking groups, meteorologists, even military personnel, who had witnessed strange phenomena in the skies over the northern Urals during the exact same time period, particularly on the night of the incident. They all described the same thing. Bright, fast-moving, silent spheres of light. Fiery orbs that would maneuver in ways no known aircraft could. Ivanov himself, while attending the hikers' funerals, was approached by multiple people who claimed to have seen these shining orbs in the sky that February. He admitted in his later interviews that he, too, had seen them. He believed these spheres were directly connected to the hikers' deaths. He theorized that one of these orbs had either exploded near the tent or emitted some kind of energy that caused the hikers to flee in terror. This would explain the lack of an explosion site, the strange internal injuries caused by some kind of concussive blast or pressure wave, and even the traces of radiation. It was a stunning admission. The lead investigator was essentially saying he believed a UFO was responsible. And he had one more piece of evidence, something he had kept quiet for over 30 years. He revealed that his team had discovered that the trees on the edge of the forest near the cedar tree showed signs of scorch damage. The damage was directional, pointing not downwards from a campfire, but from above, as if a powerful source of heat had been directed at them from the sky. And then there was the final cryptic photograph. The very last frame taken on Yuri Krivonischenko's camera. For years it was dismissed as a blurry, accidental shot taken in the dark. But when enhanced, some researchers believe it shows a cluster of bright, orange lights in the night sky. The very same fiery spheres that Ivanov was told to ignore. Suddenly, the vague official conclusion of a compelling natural force didn't sound so vague anymore. It sounded like a cover-up. It sounded like a deliberately chosen phrase to obscure a truth that the Soviet authorities could not, or would not, reveal. A truth that involved either advanced secret military weapons tests gone horribly wrong, or something even more unsettling. Something not of this world. The Soviet state wasn't admitting ignorance, it was enforcing it. They were building a wall of silence around the incident. The question was, what exactly were they trying to hide? What kind of secret was so terrible that it was worth burying the truth about the deaths of 9 of their own brightest young citizens? The answer might lie in the paranoia of the Cold War, a time when the skies were not just a place for stars, but a potential battleground for terrifying new technologies. The Soviet Union in 1959 was a nation obsessed with secrecy and defined by power. Behind the Iron Curtain, an unprecedented arms race was underway, and the Ural Mountains, this vast, seemingly empty wilderness, was in reality the nation's backyard for its most sensitive and dangerous projects. It was home to closed cities, secret production lines, and sprawling military test ranges. Places that didn't exist on any public map. Places where the future of warfare was being forged in fire and radiation. The hikers, brilliant students from a top technical university, would have known this. They would have known the skies above them weren't entirely empty, but they could never have imagined they were skiing directly into a clandestine battlefield. This brings us to one of the most enduring and plausible theories, that the Dyatlov group were accidental witnesses to a secret weapons test. That they were, quite simply, in the wrong place at the absolute worst time. Let's consider the evidence. Remember the other eyewitnesses? The other hiking groups, the geologists, even the guards at a local prison camp? All of them reported seeing strange, fast-moving, glowing spheres in the sky on the very night the Dyatlov group perished. These weren't slow-moving meteors. They were described as bright, silent, and purposeful. This aligns perfectly with reports of Soviet R-7 intercontinental ballistic missile tests, which were frequently launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, with their spent stages often falling in the remote northern Urals. Imagine the scene. The 9 hikers are in their tent, preparing for sleep. Suddenly, the night is torn apart by a blinding flash of light, brighter than the sun. It's followed not by the sound of thunder, but by a deafening, chest-rattling concussion. A pressure wave that ripples through the air and snow. This would be terrifying, disorienting. It wouldn't be a sound you could identify. It would feel like the world itself was breaking apart. In that moment of pure primal panic, their training would be useless. Their only instinct would be to flee. They slash their way out of the tent, not even stopping for boots or coats, driven by a terror they can't comprehend. A missile or rocket exploding nearby, even an airburst miles away, could explain so much. A powerful concussive blast wave is invisible, but it can inflict horrific internal injuries without necessarily breaking the skin. Think about it. Massive internal hemorrhaging, fractured ribs, a crushed skull. These are precisely the types of injuries found on Semyon Zolotaryov, Ludmila Dubinina, and Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignol. These are the injuries the medical examiner compared to the force of a high-speed car crash. An invisible wave of force, slamming them into the hard-packed snow of the ravine, could absolutely be the culprit. It would also explain why there were no signs of a struggle. There was no attacker to fight. The attacker was the air itself. And what about the radiation? The traces of radioactive isotopes found on some of their clothes. While the levels weren't lethal, their presence is profoundly strange. A conventional weapon wouldn't leave them, but a missile carrying a prototype warhead, or even just the fallout from its exotic fuel, certainly could. The military would have a paramount reason to cover up such a catastrophic failure. The loss of a secret prototype, the accidental killing of 9 of its own citizens, this was a state secret of the highest order. Investigators would be ordered to wrap it up quickly. Files would be classified. The area would be sealed off, not to protect civilians, but to allow military cleanup crews to recover any sensitive debris. The official story would be vague and dismissive, blaming an elemental force. because the truth was unthinkable. But what if the weapon wasn't a missile? What if it was something even more insidious? In the paranoid world of Cold War science, both the Soviets and the Americans were researching unconventional weapons designed not just to kill, but to incapacitate and terrorize. This leads us to the chilling theory of infrasound. Infrasound is low-frequency sound, below the range of normal human hearing. But just because you can't hear it, doesn't mean it can't affect you. At specific frequencies and high enough power, infrasound can have devastating effects on the human body. It can vibrate your internal organs. It can cause shortness of breath, anxiety, and an overwhelming irrational sense of dread. It can resonate with the fluid in your eyes, causing distorted vision or seeing phantom lights. It can, in essence, induce a state of pure panic and madness from a source that is completely invisible and silent. Now picture the scene again. The hikers are in the tent. A low-frequency hum begins, generated by a nearby test. They can't hear it, but they can feel it. A deep, unsettling vibration takes hold. Their hearts begin to race. A nameless, formless terror grips them. They feel like they're being crushed, like they can't breathe. Their minds, overloaded with fight or flight signals, scream one thing: get out. They cut their way out and run, stumbling half-naked into the sub-zero night, not away from a visible threat, but from a feeling. A feeling so powerful it overrides all logic, all training, all sense of self-preservation. This could explain the paradoxical undressing. They weren't feeling hot. Their bodies were so overwhelmed with physical distress and adrenaline that the sensation of cold was completely ignored. The infrasound weapon is a ghost. It attacks the mind and body, and then it disappears, leaving behind only chaos and death. This theory is terrifying because it's scientifically plausible. The technology was being developed, and it would explain the lack of footprints other than their own, the irrational flight, and the sheer terror that seemed to grip the group. The subsequent deaths from hypothermia and the crushing injuries in the ravine would simply be the tragic aftermath of this initial, invisible attack. So we have a compelling case. A military accident, whether a concussive blast or an infrasound weapon, neatly explains the initial event, the sudden panicked flight from the tent. It explains the devastating internal injuries that lacked any external signs of a fight. It explains the trace amounts of radiation. And most importantly, it provides a powerful motive for the Soviet government's bizarre behavior. The rushed investigation, the classified files, the vague conclusion, the silencing of witnesses. It was a cover-up, a desperate attempt to bury a catastrophic mistake and protect the secrets of the Cold War. This theory feels solid, feels rational. It pieces together the physical evidence with the geopolitical context of the time. It replaces supernatural monsters and aliens with a far more familiar monster: human ambition and the terrible price of secret technology. The hikers were simply collateral damage in a war that was being fought in the shadows and in the skies above their heads. And yet one detail nags. One piece of the puzzle refuses to fit. A military weapon, a concussive blast, or a wave of infrasound can break bones, can rupture organs, can drive people mad with fear. But it cannot do what was done to Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov. It cannot carefully and precisely remove a tongue. It cannot gouge out a pair of eyes. Those injuries are not the result of an indiscriminate blast or a wave of sound. They are specific. They are intimate. They feel almost surgical. A military accident explains the force, the fear, and the radiation. It explains the cover-up, but it doesn't explain the mutilations. For that, we have to consider a possibility that is somehow far more personal and far more terrifying, that the compelling force on that mountain wasn't a weapon at all. It was human. If it was human, the question becomes, who else was on that dead mountain in the middle of a Siberian winter? The initial suspicion, naturally, fell on the only other people known to inhabit that unforgiving landscape, the indigenous Mansi tribesmen. For centuries, the Mansi had roamed these mountains, hunting, trapping, and treating the peaks with a deep spiritual reverence. Kholat Syakhl, the mountain where the hikers perished, was on their land. And to the Soviet authorities, this was an open and shut case waiting to happen. A group of outsiders trespasses on sacred land. They anger the locals, and the locals retaliate. It was a simple, ugly story, and one the investigators pursued aggressively. Mansi hunters were interrogated, some even arrested. The theory was that the hikers had accidentally stumbled upon a sacred idol or a secret prayer site, and for this sacrilege, they were punished. Seemed plausible on the surface, but the more the investigators looked, the less sense it made. The Mansi were known to be a peaceful people, often helping Russian travelers they encountered. In fact, they were instrumental in the search for the lost hikers. And their own elders, when questioned, said that while the mountain was a place to be respected, it wasn't forbidden. They traversed it themselves for hunting. There were no sacred golden idols, no secret altars that demanded a blood price. But the most compelling evidence against their involvement was the evidence at the scene itself. The Mansi were master hunters, masters of the forest and the snow. If they had attacked the camp, there would have been signs, tracks from their skis, footprints from their reindeer hide boots, signs of a violent, overwhelming struggle outside the tent. There was nothing, only the bare footprints of the 9 hikers. Furthermore, the injuries didn't align with any known Mansi practice. They were hunters, not butchers. The crushing internal trauma and the bizarre mutilations were alien to their culture. The investigators, despite their initial suspicions, had to conclude that the Mansi were innocent. The compelling force was not local. It had come from somewhere else. So if it wasn't the locals, who was left? This is where the story takes a turn, away from ancient traditions and into the dark, beating heart of the Soviet Union itself. You have to remember where this was and when. The Northern Urals in 1959 weren't just a wilderness. They were part of a vast, invisible prison. This entire region was dotted with some of the most notorious labor camps in the entire Gulag system. Places like Ivdalelagi were sprawling complexes where tens of thousands of prisoners, from petty thieves to political dissidents to the most violent criminals, were worked to death in mines and logging operations. And prisoners sometimes escaped. Imagine it. A handful of hardened convicts known as zeks make a break for it. They are desperate men, brutalized by a system designed to break the human spirit. They have nothing but the thin clothes on their backs and a burning, savage will to survive. They flee into the taiga, the frozen forest, where the cold is a far more efficient warden than any guard tower. They are starving, freezing, and hunted. And then, through a sheer accident of fate, they stumble upon a light on the side of a mountain. A tent. A tent filled with healthy, well-fed young people with warm clothes, good boots, food, alcohol, and supplies. To these escaped convicts, that tent wasn't a campsite. It was a miracle. It was salvation. This theory, the Gulag theory, suddenly makes a lot of the bizarre evidence click into place. The convicts, armed with knives, could have silently approached the tent under the cover of darkness. They wouldn't have announced themselves. They would have slashed the tent from the inside. A knife to the throat of the person nearest the opening, creating instant terror and chaos. They wouldn't have wanted a fight inside the cramped tent where the students had ice axes and knives of their own. The goal was to get them out, to control them. Get out now or you die. This explains why the hikers fled in such a state of undress. They weren't given a choice. They were forced out at knife point into the lethal cold. This wasn't a panicked flight from an avalanche. It was a death march, herded down the slope by armed and desperate men. This explains the organized retreat. They weren't running blindly, they were being moved. Down by the tree line, the horror unfolds. The convicts need clothes immediately. Krivonischenko and Doroshenko, the first 2 found by the cedar tree, are the strongest. They fight back. They are beaten, subdued, and stripped of their clothing. The convicts, now with a few more layers against the cold, turn their attention to the others. The fire the hikers built wasn't just for warmth. It was a beacon of defiance, a last stand. They were trying to wait out their attackers, trying to survive long enough for a chance to escape. The broken branches high up the cedar tree? Maybe one of the hikers, likely Rustam Slobodin, climbed it not to look for the camp, but to watch the movements of their captors. The convicts are in control. They are brutal, but they are also pragmatic. They need to eliminate the witnesses. Igor Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin make a break for it, a desperate, final attempt to get back to the tent, back to their supplies, back to a chance of survival. They are hunted down in the snow, one by one. Their positions, spaced out and pointing towards the tent, aren't the track of a weary return. They are the final resting places of a failed escape. And what about the 4 in the den? Ludmila Dubinina, an outspoken and defiant young woman. Semyon Zolotaryov, the oldest, a combat veteran who would not have gone down without a ferocious fight. This is where the theory gets its darkest edge. These four may have been subjected to something far worse than a simple robbery. The convicts, drunk on their newfound power and possibly the hikers' own alcohol, may have engaged in torture. The horrific injuries, the crushed chests, the shattered skulls, are the result of a savage close-quarters beating. This wasn't done with fists. This was done with the butt of a rifle, a heavy rock, or by stomping on them with boots they had just stolen. The kind of overwhelming, bone-shattering force that leaves no marks on the skin. And the mutilations. The missing eyes of Dubinina and Zolotaryov. The missing tongue of Dubinina. In the brutal code of the Russian criminal underworld, these acts have meaning. Eyes are removed to punish a witness. A tongue is removed to punish an informant, or someone who screamed, or someone who said the wrong thing. It's a message. A final gruesome act of dominance. This theory paints a complete picture. It explains the fear, the flight, the separation of the group, the violence, and even the specific cruel nature of the injuries. It turns the mystery of Dyatlov Pass into a human tragedy. A story of a chance encounter between innocence and absolute depravity, in the middle of the world's most unforgiving wilderness. The Soviet cover-up then makes perfect sense. An incident like this, a group of model Soviet students slaughtered by escapees from a state-run gulag, would be a monumental embarrassment. It would expose the brutality and incompetence of the prison system. It would be a stain on the image of the perfect, orderly Soviet state. So you classify the files. You blame it on an unknown, compelling force. You let the story fade into myth and rumor. It's a terrifyingly plausible scenario. It requires no monsters, no aliens, no secret weapons. It requires only the darkness that can exist within the human heart. But, as neat as it sounds, the Gulag theory has problems. Big ones. If these were desperate men taking everything they could, why did they leave behind money, food, and valuable equipment in the tent? If they were wearing boots, why were there no boot prints found anywhere near the bodies or the camp? Only the hikers' own? The snowfall could have hidden them, but it seems unlikely it would hide them all so perfectly. And then there are the two pieces of evidence that this theory simply cannot explain. The pieces that break the entire narrative. The traces of radiation found on the victim's clothing. And the massive crushing force required to inflict those injuries in the den. A force that one medical expert at the time said was comparable to being hit by a speeding car. Could a few starving, half-frozen convicts, armed with nothing but knives and rage, really do that? The human element seems essential to this story. But the evidence suggests that the humans involved may not have been escaped convicts. They may have been something else entirely. Something organized. Something with power. And what they were doing on that mountain had nothing to do with robbery, and everything to do with secrets the Soviet Union would kill to protect. To understand what happened on that mountain, we have to understand the world the hikers lived in. This wasn't just any country in 1959. This was the Soviet Union at the absolute height of the Cold War. A paranoid, secretive superpower locked in a technological and ideological deathmatch with the United States. And the Ural Mountains? They weren't just a pristine wilderness. They were the industrial and military backbone of the entire Soviet Empire. Hidden cities, secret factories, and clandestine military bases dotted the landscape, all working on projects the outside world could only guess at. This is the world Igor Dyatlov and his friends walked into. And it's this world that gives birth to the most enduring and, for many, the most plausible category of theories, that the hikers were killed by a secret military weapons test. Let's go back to the evidence. Remember the other hiking group, the one led by Vladislav Karelin, who were camping about 30 miles south of Dyatlov's group on the very same night. They, along with meteorologists and even military personnel in the region, reported seeing strange lights in the sky. They described them as bright, silent, fast-moving orange spheres. One witness, a student named Valentin Yakomenko, described a shining circular body that flew over his village, emitting a powerful light. This wasn't a weather balloon. This wasn't a shooting star. This was advanced, unknown technology lighting up the winter sky. What if the Dyatlov group saw it too? Not from 30 miles away, but right up close. Imagine it. You're in your tent, settling in for the night on a desolate, frozen mountainside. Suddenly, the entire landscape is bathed in an unnatural, blinding orange light. A low, vibrating hum fills the air, a sound that you feel in your bones more than you hear with your ears. The sound grows into a deafening roar. Panic. Pure primal terror. You don't know what it is, an explosion, an avalanche, an attack, you just know you have to get out. You slash your way through the canvas and run, barefoot and half-dressed, into the sub-zero darkness, away from the light, away from the sound. This scenario, a missile or rocket test gone wrong, neatly explains the initial panic and the flight from the tent. The Soviet Union was constantly testing new rocket technology at sites like the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kapustin Yar. A stray missile, an aborted launch, or a booster rocket falling to Earth could easily have been the source of the lights and sounds. The shockwave from a nearby aerial explosion, a concussive blast, could have inflicted the horrific internal injuries seen on Thibaut-Brignoles, Zolotaryov, and Dubinina. A blast wave is a terrifyingly powerful and invisible force. It can pulverize internal organs and shatter bones without ever breaking the skin, perfectly matching their injuries. It would also explain the government's bizarre behavior. A failed test of a top-secret intercontinental ballistic missile? That's not just an embarrassment. It's a national security crisis. The last thing the Kremlin would want is a group of student hikers stumbling upon the wreckage, or worse, surviving to tell the tale. The immediate lockdown of the area, the military controlling the investigation, the classified files, it all clicks into place. They weren't investigating a hiking accident, they were performing damage control. They were sanitizing a secret military disaster. And then there's the radiation. Traces of radioactive material were found on the clothing of several hikers. The official explanation was that it was residual fallout from global atmospheric testing, but many researchers find that explanation weak. The levels, while not lethal, were significant. This has led to speculation that the weapon being tested wasn't conventional. Perhaps it was a radiological dispersal device, a dirty bomb, or a missile carrying a nuclear payload that malfunctioned. The hikers, running from the initial blast, could have stumbled into a contaminated area, a patch of snow where radioactive debris had fallen. But this theory, as clean as it seems, has its own problems. If there was a missile crash, where is the wreckage? The search party scoured that mountain for months. They found tiny buttons and scraps of fabric, but not a single twisted piece of metal, no impact crater, no scorched earth. Nothing. And while a concussive blast explains the internal injuries, it doesn't explain the selective nature of them. Why were only 4 hikers so catastrophically injured while the others, found hundreds of yards away, had no such trauma? A blast wave isn't a surgical instrument. This is where the theory evolves. What if it wasn't a missile? What if it was something else? Something stranger? The Soviet military was known to be experimenting with all manner of unconventional weapons. There's speculation about powerful infrasound weapons, devices that use low-frequency sound waves to induce feelings of intense panic, nausea, and dread, causing people to flee in irrational terror. Such a weapon could have driven the hikers from the tent without leaving a single physical trace. The subsequent deaths would then be from hypothermia, and the major injuries from a fall into the ravine in the panicked, disoriented darkness. It's a compelling idea, but it still doesn't quite account for the sheer violence of the chest and skull fractures. This leads us to a darker, more complex variation of the military theory. It's called the controlled delivery theory, and it reframes the entire incident not as an accident, but as a clandestine operation gone horribly wrong. This theory suggests that the hike itself was a cover, that one or more members of the group, possibly the mysterious Semyon Zolotaryov, were secretly KGB agents or informants. Their mission was to meet with another group of agents, perhaps posing as the Mansi hunters or even American spies, out on the desolate mountain pass. The purpose of this meeting? To deliver or exchange sensitive materials. What kind of materials? Perhaps documents or microfilm, or perhaps a sample of radioactive material from one of the secret nuclear facilities in the region, like the Mayak plant, the source of a horrific nuclear disaster just 2 years prior. This would be a test of loyalty, a controlled delivery, to see if the material would be handed over to the correct contacts. In this scenario, the hikers weren't just witnesses, they were participants. The radioactive contamination found on their clothes wasn't from a missile, it was from the very package they were carrying. The theory suggests the deal went bad. The other party, for whatever reason, decided to eliminate the hikers. They were ambushed, forced from their tent, and systematically hunted down in the cold. The brutal, torturous nature of the injuries suddenly makes more sense. It wasn't an explosion. It was a violent personal attack by trained operatives. The crushed ribs, the fractured skull. These are the kinds of injuries inflicted by people who know how to kill. This spy thriller narrative seems far-fetched, but it connects some very strange dots. It explains Zolotaryov's mysterious past and his sudden insistence on joining the group. It explains the radiation and why it was concentrated on certain items of clothing. It explains the military presence and the subsequent cover-up. The state wasn't hiding a weapons test. They were hiding a botched intelligence operation and the murder of 9 of their own citizens by their own agents. The file was classified not to protect a piece of technology, but to bury a profound betrayal. We are now deep in a world of shadows and secrets, where the lines blur between a simple hiking trip and a Cold War conspiracy. We have an unseen force, either a technological terror from the sky or a human one emerging from the trees. Both possibilities are terrifying. Both could explain the initial flight from the tent and the brutal end for the hikers. But neither theory can fully account for the final, gruesome mysteries discovered in the ravine, because the story gets even stranger. The violent injuries, the radiation, the orange spheres, they are all eclipsed by what the medical examiner found when he looked closely at Lyudmila Dubinina. Something that defies explanation by missile blasts or secret agents. Something that points to a horror of an entirely different nature. The medical examiner, Boris Vozhrozdiny, noted that Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue. But the word missing doesn't do justice to the clinical, almost surgical neatness of the wound. It wasn't ripped out in a struggle. There was no sign of the kind of tearing you'd expect from a wild animal. The hyoid bone, a small U-shaped bone in the neck that supports the tongue, was completely intact. It was as if the tongue, along with parts of her mouth's floor and palate, had simply been removed. This discovery is a fracture point in the entire investigation. It's the moment the case transforms from a tragic hiking accident into something profoundly disturbing. Scavenging animals were immediately considered. A fox or a weasel might find its way to a body, but the other soft tissues of her face, her lips, her nose, the skin around her eyes, were largely untouched, though heavily decomposed by the running water of the stream, and animals almost always go for the eyes first. Yet, Lyudmila's eyes were still in their sockets. Why would a scavenger perform such a specific internal mutilation, leaving everything else? It made no sense, and the horror was just beginning. Lying near Lyudmila was Semyon Zolotaryov, the mysterious older member of the group. On the outside, he looked relatively unscathed, but inside his body was a wreck. Vozhrozdiny found that 5 of Semyon's ribs on his right side were fractured. This wasn't a simple crack. It was a flail chest injury, a catastrophic break where a segment of the rib cage detaches from the rest of the chest wall. It's the kind of injury doctors see in high-speed car crashes, falls from great heights, or severe industrial accidents. It takes an immense, crushing force to inflict. Yet, just like with Lyudmila, there were no corresponding external injuries. No major bruises on his chest, no cuts, no abrasions. It was as if he'd been squeezed by a giant, invisible vice. Then there was Nikolai Thibault-Bricknolles. His skull had been subjected to a similar impossible force. He had a massive, extensive fracture at the base and side of his skull. Again, the medical examiner was baffled. A blow that could shatter a man's skull in such a way should have left a gruesome external wound. It should have torn the skin, caused massive bleeding and bruising. But Nikolai's head showed no significant soft tissue damage. It was as if a silent, invisible hammer had struck him with impossible power. And finally, there was Alexander Kolevatov. His injuries were more subtle, but no less strange. He had damage behind his ear and a deformed neck, suggesting severe internal trauma, but the full extent was harder to determine due to decomposition. The medical examiner, a man who had seen the worst of what humanity and nature could do, was unequivocal in his report. He stated that the force required to cause these injuries was astronomical. He directly compared it to the shockwave from a high-speed car collision, and he made a critical, chilling conclusion. He ruled out the possibility that another human being could have inflicted these wounds, not only because of the sheer power needed, but because of the complete lack of external evidence. A human attacker, no matter how strong, leaves marks, bruises from a fist, cuts from a weapon, signs of a struggle. There was nothing. The bodies in the ravine were broken from the inside out. So what are we left with? 4 bodies discovered months later in a watery grave. 2 of them, Lyudmila and Semyon, with chests crushed by a force that left no mark. 1, Nikolai, with a skull fracture of impossible power. And 1, Lyudmila again, with her tongue precisely and inexplicably removed. This is where the most popular and scientific explanation for the Dyatlov Pass incident, the avalanche theory, begins to crumble. Proponents of the theory argue that a slab avalanche, a dense wall of snow, slid down and struck the tent. The weight of the snow, they say, could have caused the crushing injuries to the 4 hikers who would later be found in the ravine. The panic from this event would explain why they cut their way out and fled. Sounds plausible at first, but when you hold it up against the evidence, the theory is riddled with holes. First, the location. Igor Dyatlov was a highly experienced skier and mountaineer. The slope of Kholat Syakhl where they camped was less than 30 degrees, generally considered safe from avalanches. There was no evidence of a recent, major avalanche in the area when rescuers arrived. The tent itself, while collapsed, was not buried under tons of snow. The poles holding it up were still largely in place. A force powerful enough to shatter ribs and skulls would have flattened that tent into a pancake and likely dragged it hundreds of feet down the slope. And then there are the injuries themselves. An avalanche is a blunt, chaotic instrument. It doesn't selectively crush the chests of some hikers while leaving others with only hypothermia. It doesn't cause massive internal trauma while leaving no external bruising. Survivors of avalanches talk about being hit by a solid wall, of being tumbled and battered. The injuries are external as well as internal, but the Dyatlov hikers don't fit this pattern. It's a mismatch of cause and effect. Even the lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, who was under immense pressure to close the case, eventually admitted years later that he was ordered to drop all other lines of inquiry and attribute it to a natural force. He himself remained unconvinced. He said, "I suspected at the time and am almost sure now that these bright flying spheres had a direct connection to the group's death. The spheres, the fireballs, were back to the lights in the sky. But even a secret missile test struggles to explain the details. A blast wave and airburst could certainly generate the pressure needed to cause these injuries. But again, why the selectivity? Why would an explosion crush the ribs of Semyon but leave Alexander, lying right next to him, relatively unharmed? And how does a missile blast remove a tongue?" As investigators pored over the last pieces of evidence, they found one more anomaly, one more thread that didn't fit into any conventional tapestry. When the bodies and their clothing were tested with a Geiger counter, several items showed abnormal levels of radioactive contamination. Specifically, the sweater worn by Lyudmila Dubinina and the trousers on Yuri Krivonischenko were significantly radioactive. Now, this wasn't fallout-level radiation that would cause acute sickness, but it was present and it was strange. Where did it come from? The immediate suspicion fell on the secret Soviet weapons and nuclear programs. Krivonischenko himself had worked at the Mayak nuclear facility, the site of a major disaster in 1957. Could he have brought contaminated clothing with him? It's possible, but it doesn't feel right. Why would only some items be contaminated? And why would this contamination be found on hikers who died miles apart at different times? The radiation adds yet another layer of high strangeness to an already impossible puzzle. It feeds the theories of secret weapons, of exotic technology, of something falling from the sky that night. It's a piece of hard scientific data that points away from simple explanations like weather or animal attacks. So let's take a step back and look at the crime scene. We have 9 dead hikers, 5 who appear to have frozen to death in various states of undress, 4 who died from violent, inexplicable internal injuries that no human could inflict and no avalanche could convincingly explain. We have a tent methodically cut open from the inside. We have footprints of people walking, not running, away from their only shelter into deadly cold. We have strange lights in the sky reported by multiple independent witnesses. We have radioactive contamination on the victim's clothing. And we have a single haunting macabre detail that defies all logic: a missing tongue. The official conclusion that the hikers died as a result of a compelling natural force is so vague as to be meaningless. It's a bureaucratic shrug, a way to close a file that contained too many questions without answers, because the evidence, when taken as a whole, doesn't point to a known natural force. An avalanche is nature. A blizzard is nature. A bear attack is nature. All of them leave predictable signs. What happened on that mountain left behind a set of clues that seem designed to contradict each other, to lead investigators in circles. The force that killed them was powerful enough to shatter bone, but subtle enough to leave no mark. It was terrifying enough to make them abandon their shelter, but not so immediate that it prevented them from walking calmly down the slope. It was a force that operated by a set of rules we simply do not understand. And for decades, that's where the story was left. A file closed with the vague, unsettling conclusion of a compelling natural force. It was a blank canvas onto which we could project our deepest fears. Aliens, secret weapons, the Yeti, a force with rules we couldn't comprehend. But what if the rules weren't unknowable? What if they were just complex? What if the answer wasn't lurking in the shadows of the paranormal, but hidden in plain sight, written in the language of physics, snow, and wind? In 2019, the Russian Prosecutor General's office reopened the case. They'd had enough of the speculation, the sensationalism. They ran computer simulations, consulted with meteorologists, and revisited the evidence with 60 years of scientific advancement at their disposal. Their conclusion was blunt, and to many deeply unsatisfying. An avalanche. Now hold on. I know what you're thinking. An avalanche? The original investigators ruled that out on day one. The slope wasn't steep enough, only about 23 degrees. There were no signs of a massive snow slide. The hikers' own tracks were still visible leading away from the tent. For 60 years, the avalanche theory was the first one dismissed, the explanation for amateurs. But this new investigation wasn't talking about the kind of avalanche you see in movies. A thundering 100-foot wall of powder erasing the entire mountainside. They were talking about something much smaller, much quieter, and infinitely more insidious. A slab avalanche. Imagine the snowpack on a mountainside isn't one solid mass. It's layered like a cake. You have a hard, dense layer on top, the slab, sitting on a weak, sugary layer of snow beneath. All it takes is a trigger. It could be new snowfall, a change in temperature, or the act of cutting into a slope to build a platform for your tent. The Dyatlov group, in an effort to shelter from the wind, did exactly that. They carved out a ledge, compromising the integrity of the snowpack they were about to sleep on. That night, the conditions were perfect for a disaster. Katabatic winds, brutal, heavy winds that cascade down a slope under the force of gravity, were battering Kholat Syakhl. These winds can transport huge amounts of snow, depositing it on top of the existing slab, adding pressure, second by second, minute by minute. The hikers are in their tent, likely asleep. Then a crack. Not a roar, but a sharp, fracturing sound. The slab of snow directly above their tent gives way. It's not a massive slide that travels for miles. It's a relatively small block, maybe only 16 feet wide, that slides down just a few feet and comes to rest right on top of them. Suddenly, the tent isn't a shelter. It's a trap. A heavy, suffocating weight is pressing down. The entrance is blocked, buried. Panic sets in. They can't get out the way they came in. They do the only thing they can. They grab knives and slash their way out through the side of the tent. This explains the cuts from the inside. It wasn't a frantic escape from a monster. It was a desperate act of self-preservation to avoid being buried alive. Once outside, they're standing in their socks and sleeping clothes in the middle of a polar hurricane. It's minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit, with winds that make it feel like minus 50. They've escaped the immediate danger, but they've just stepped into a much larger one. And here, the official story diverges from the one we've come to know. They weren't fleeing in terror. They walked down the slope calmly. Why? Because the danger was over. The slab had settled. They weren't being chased. Their goal now was survival. They needed to get below the tree line, find shelter, and wait until they could go back for their gear. This is where the tragedy compounds. They make it to the cedar tree. They start a fire. A valiant but ultimately futile effort. The first two to die, Krivonischenko and Doroshenko, succumb to hypothermia right there. Their bodies are found first, stripped to their underwear. This isn't a sign of a struggle. It's a known horrifying symptom of severe hypothermia called paradoxical undressing. As the body nears shutdown, the constricted blood vessels in the extremities suddenly dilate, creating a burning sensation of being hot. In their final delirious moments, they felt like they were on fire and tore off their own clothes. The other three, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, tried to make it back up to the tent. A desperate, heroic gamble. Maybe they realized the immediate danger had passed. Maybe they knew their only chance was to retrieve their equipment. But the mountain was too strong. The cold was too absolute. They collapsed one by one, facing the direction of their buried tent, their last hope. But this still leaves the biggest question. The final four. The ones in the den with the crushing, inexplicable injuries. A simple, slow-moving slab of snow couldn't do that, could it? For years, this was the checkmate against the avalanche theory. Ribs crushed with the force of a car crash. A skull fractured without any external wound. How? This is where the most recent and perhaps most brilliant piece of the puzzle comes from. In 2021, scientists from Switzerland, Johann Gaume and Alexander Puzrin, published a paper in the journal Nature. They used advanced computer models, even borrowing animation code from the movie Frozen to simulate snow physics, and they ran a simulation of the Dyatlov Pass Incident. Their findings were chilling. They confirmed that a small slab avalanche was entirely possible under the exact conditions that night. But they went further. They modeled what would happen if the hikers were lying on their firm skis, which they used as a base for the tent floor. The simulation showed the slab of snow hard-packed, dense and heavy, crashing down onto the sleeping hikers. The combination of the heavy slab and the unyielding skis beneath them created a vice. The force would have been immense, more than enough to cause the specific, catastrophic internal injuries seen on Dubinina, Thibaut-Brignoles, and Zolotaryov. They weren't injured outside. They were mortally wounded inside the tent, before they even cut their way out. Suddenly, the entire timeline snaps into focus. The 9 hikers escape the crushed tent, but 3 of them are already dying. They can barely move. The others, uninjured, help them down the slope to the relative shelter of the den. They do what they can to care for their friends. They lay them down, give them their own clothes to try and keep them warm, the final heartbreaking act of camaraderie. But their friends' injuries are too severe. They die in that snow den, and their companions, having given away their own layers, soon follow, succumbing to the unforgiving cold. This single, elegant theory explains almost everything. The tent cut from the inside, the orderly retreat down the slope, the lack of clothing, the paradoxical undressing, the separation of the groups, and yes, even the horrifying chest-crushing injuries. It wasn't a monster or a secret weapon. It was the mountain's cold arithmetic. What about the last few pieces? The radiation? The orange spheres? The radiation was minimal, easily explained by thorium gas mantles used in camping lanterns at the time, or simply background radiation from atmospheric weapons tests. It was a red herring. The orange spheres in the sky? The area was a known flight path for Soviet R-7 Semyorka intercontinental ballistic missile tests. These launches were famous for creating spectacular, fiery orange light shows in the night sky as stages of the rocket separated and burned up in the atmosphere. The hikers and other witnesses likely saw a secret missile test, a common sight in the Cold War Urals, and had no idea it was entirely unrelated to their own fate. The truth of the Dyatlov Pass incident is not a story of aliens, spies, or monsters. It's a story of a cascade of small, unfortunate events. A decision to camp on a compromised slope. A freak combination of wind and snow. A silent, creeping killer that struck in their sleep. It is a terrifying reminder of human fragility in the face of nature's immense, indifferent power. The force that killed them wasn't unknown or supernatural. It was gravity. It was pressure. It was cold. It was a perfect storm of physics and bad luck. And perhaps that is the most chilling explanation of all. Because a monster can be fought. A conspiracy can be exposed. But the raw, unthinking power of the natural world? You can only hope it doesn't notice you are there. The 9 hikers on Kholat Syakhl weren't victims of a mystery. They were victims of the mountain itself. And now, after more than 60 years, they can and they should finally rest in peace.